Rick Ross just looked into a camera and accused 50 Cent of running one of the most elaborate marketing scams in hip-hop history. And the craziest part is that the evidence might actually bury Ross instead. 2 hours. That is all it took for a sneaker older than some of the kids buying it to vanish from shelves completely. And within 48 hours, the biggest boss in Miami was telling the world it never happened. He says the sellout is fake. He says the numbers are smoke. He says 50 Cent is lying to the people, and he reached all the way back into a decade-old courtroom file to prove it. But here is what almost nobody covering this story is going to tell you. The deeper you dig into what Rick Ross actually said, the more it looks like he just confessed to something he never meant to confess. And by the end of this breakdown, you are going to see exactly why this fight was never about sneakers at all. It is about two empires built in two completely different ways, and only one of them was built to last. So let us get into it, because this one has layers on top of layers. Here is what actually went down. Reebok made the decision to bring back the G-Unit G6, the exact silhouette that 50 Cent turned into a cultural event back in 2003, and they did not touch a thing. Same white base, same red and blue color blocking, same everything. They announced the return on a Thursday, kept the design identical to the original run, and then the internet did what the internet does when nostalgia meets a name that still moves people. According to reports, the G-Unit Reebok G6 sold out completely within 2 hours of release. Not 2 days, not 2 weeks, 2 hours. 23 years after the shoe first hit stores, it walked back into the market like it never left, and the demand was so immediate that even people inside the industry were caught off guard. Now, some folks were surprised by that. 50 Cent was not one of them. In a brief email interview with Footwear News, the man born Curtis Jackson addressed the reaction directly, and his take is worth paying attention to because it tells you exactly how he sees his own position in the culture. He said the response to the shoe is not really about nostalgia. In his words, it is about the impact the sneaker made when it first arrived. He said he knew he had something big from the very beginning. That back then the whole team was just focused on making noise and doing something that felt different, and that seeing people still excited about it all these years later is crazy to him. He credited the fans for keeping the shoe alive, and he said it means a lot to him personally. Now, whether you fully buy that framing or not, and we're going to come back to that, the numbers did what numbers do. They spoke, and Reebok leadership was quick to get in front of the moment too. Reebok CEO Todd Krinsky responded to the sellout by saying the company is incredibly excited about the momentum the release created and that they cannot wait for what comes next. Read between the lines on that statement. That is not a goodbye. That is a corporation telling you more G-Unit product is coming, because corporations do not tease sequels to flops. And understand the context 50 Cent is operating from here, because it matters for everything that comes after. This is a man who has stayed a permanent fixture in pop culture not through music alone, but through a sprawling list of business ventures, television projects, and the power universe over at Stars that turned him from a rapper into a full-blown media executive. Reebok, for its part, has stayed in the conversation through a long line of collaborators, names like Angel Reese, Cameron, Kendrick Lamar, Cardi B, and Karol G. Those partnerships performed, but this one was different. This one was not Reebok chasing a moment. This was Reebok answering a demand. The hype around G-Unit never fully cooled off after 2003. The fans kept asking, and the company finally listened. That is the detail that separates this release from every other celebrity shoe drop of the year. And it is the detail that makes what happened next so telling. Because Rick Ross watched all of this unfold, and Rick Ross decided he could not let it stand. Within days of the sellout making headlines, Ross got on camera and went directly at 50 Cent, and he did not tiptoe into it. He came out swinging with a question designed to do maximum damage. He asked why 50 Cent is lying to the people about selling all those shoes. He flat out told him to stop lying. And then he detonated what he clearly believed was his nuclear option. He brought up the bankruptcy. He said, in front of everybody, that 50 Cent filed a massive bankruptcy the last time those shoes were moving, and he framed it as proof that nothing about this sellout should be believed. He piled on from there, telling the audience that no reseller is moving those pairs, that nobody they know actually bought them, and that the people should not fall for any of it. He even threw in a toast to the real hustlers, the implication being obvious. 50 Cent, in Ross's telling, is not one of them. That is a heavy accusation. That is not standard rap beef sparring. That is one man telling the public that another man's signature business triumph is a fabrication and backing it with legal history. So before we go one step further, we have to do the thing Ross is betting you will not do. We have to actually open that bankruptcy file and read what is inside it, because what is inside it is a lot more complicated and a lot more damaging to Ross's argument than he is counting on. Here is what Ross is actually pointing at, and we are going to walk through it slowly, because the details matter more than the headline. Back in 2015, 50 Cent appeared in a Manhattan courtroom during the punitive damages phase of an invasion of privacy lawsuit. A jury had already ordered him to pay $5 million to a woman named Lastonia Leviston, who said he did not have her permission when a private tape involving her ended up online, with 50 narrating over it to taunt Rick Ross, because of course Rick Ross is sitting right in the middle of that story too. Days after that $5 million judgment, 50 filed for personal bankruptcy protection in Connecticut, listing his assets and liabilities in a range between $10 million and $50 million, while his attorney told the court he was worth a little over $4 million. And on the stand, 50 Cent did what defendants in punitive damages hearings are advised to do. He downplayed everything. The Forbes list that had ranked him among the 5 richest artists in hip-hop, with a valuation around $155 million, he waved it off. The luxury cars, the jewelry, the image, he testified that he rents, borrows, or leases it. Asked about a massive 65-carat ring he had shown off on Instagram, he described it as a borrowed piece from a jeweler. Asked directly whether he made around $100 million when Coca-Cola bought vitamin water back in 2007, the deal widely credited with changing his life financially, he deflected and essentially told the lawyer to ask Coca-Cola. He confirmed he could command 6 figures just to appear at a nightclub, but when the questions turned to his partnerships and licensing deals with major corporations, including Disney and Reebok, he got very vague, very quickly. Now here is where Rick Ross takes all of that and builds his case. Ross looks at that testimony and says, "See, he told you under oath that he was not what he claimed to be." And on the surface, it is a devastating clip. It has been devastating for years. Every time 50 flexes anything, somebody pulls that footage back out, and Ross knows exactly what he is doing by pulling it out now. But hold on, because there are 2 things Rick Ross is hoping you do not notice, and we are going to notice both of them. Thing number 1, the timeline does not cooperate with him. The G-Unit sneaker deal with Reebok was a 2003 phenomenon. The bankruptcy was filed in 2015. That is a 12-year gap Ross just erased with one sentence. The shoes were not failing when he filed. The shoes were already a legacy product by then. What actually happened in 2015 is that 50 Cent took a courtroom loss, got hit with a judgment, and used a completely legal financial maneuver to reorganize and protect himself. The same maneuver corporations and moguls use every single week in this country without a single headline questioning their legitimacy. And here is the part that really undercuts the attack. He did not stay down. He restructured. He settled his obligations. And then he went and built the Power universe into one of the most valuable franchises on premium television. If that is what financial ruin looks like, sign everybody up. Thing number 2, and this is the one nobody seems to say out loud. Downplaying your wealth in a punitive damages hearing is not a confession. It is a defense. The entire purpose of that phase of a trial is for the jury to decide how much more money to take from you. Every lawyer on planet Earth tells their client the same thing in that chair. You own nothing. You rent everything. The ring is borrowed. The cars are leased. Was it theatrical? Absolutely. Was it a legal strategy aimed at the exact people deciding his financial punishment? Also absolutely. Ross is presenting courtroom damage control as if it were a business audit, and those are 2 very different documents. Now, does that mean 50 Cent has never stretched a number for marketing purposes? Come on now. This is hip-hop. Every number in hip-hop comes with a little seasoning on it. But there is a big difference between questioning a man's flair for promotion and declaring a verified, retailer-celebrated, 2-hour sellout to be a fiction. Reebok's own CEO went on record praising the momentum. That is a corporation with obligations to its partners putting its name behind the demand. Ross is not just calling 50 a liar. He is calling Reebok's executive team liars too, whether he realizes it or not. And this is where the conversation shifts from the courtroom to the business classroom, because buried inside Ross's attack is an actual theory, And to be fair, it is not a stupid one. Ross made the point on his own platforms that certain artists cannot translate followers into buyers. He threw out numbers, saying somebody moved 22,000 the first week and barely anything the second, and he argued that when you see those dramatic fall-offs, what you are really seeing is inflation. Manufactured demand. In his framing, the machines do the first week, and reality does the second. And then he delivered the line that the whole internet grabbed onto. The new flex, according to Ross, is having no bots behind the numbers. Keep it authentic, keep it clean, let the music do the fighting, play the long game. That is how he says he has been winning for 20 years. Then he aimed the theory directly at 50 Cent's chest. His question was simple. If these artists genuinely have millions upon millions of real people moving with them, why does nothing they touch outside of music convert? Why can't the sneakers sell? Why can't the liquor sell? Why does every side venture stall out if the fan base is as real as the first week numbers claim it is? And listen, that is a real question. That deserves a real answer, not just laughs. Because in the streaming era, we have all watched artists post astronomical first week numbers and then vanish from the conversation by week 3. We have watched follower counts in the tens of millions produce product launches that could not fill a mall kiosk. So the suspicion Ross is tapping into is not crazy. It is a suspicion a lot of you already carry around. But here is where Ross's theory collides with the wall, and it collides hard. He built this entire argument on the premise that the G-Unit G6 did not really sell, in a week when the G-Unit G6 sold out in 2 hours. He is making the case that 50 Cent is the example of followers who do not convert into buyers, at the exact moment 50 Cent's followers just converted into buyers so fast that the product disappeared before lunch. The thesis ate the evidence. Whatever you want to say about bots and first-week inflation, bots do not clear retail inventory in 120 minutes. Algorithms do not line up for retro sneakers. Real people with real cards did that. And those real people were not just buying a shoe. They were buying a piece of 2003, a piece of the G-Unit era, a piece of a brand that raised them. For the newer viewers wondering how we even got here, the short version matters. This feud did not start over sneakers, and it did not start this year. It goes back to the late 2000s, when a look at an award show, or a perceived look depending on whose retelling you believe, spiraled into diss records, leaked backstories, cartoons, court filings, and one of the most durable rivalries in modern rap. Nearly 2 decades later, both men are closer to mogul status than to the booth that started it, and yet the feud persists because the feud itself became an asset. Every skirmish trends. Every jab monetizes. These two may be the only pairing in hip-hop where the conflict has outturned the reconciliation ever could. And consider how 50 Cent has handled attacks for 20 years, because it is a masterclass Ross should have studied before pressing record. 50 does not argue with accusations. He merchandises them. Courtroom sketch goes viral. He leans in. Bankruptcy jokes at their peak. He tells them louder than anyone. This is a man who turned his lowest legal moment into a running bit he controls, which means every time Ross revives that file, he is not exposing 50. He is quoting 50's own material back to him with none of the comedic timing. You cannot shame a man with a joke he already sold tickets on. That is the trap Ross walks into every single time, and it is why, on some level, people suspect 50 Cent quietly enjoys these flare-ups. They cost him nothing, and they restock his engagement for the quarter. Which brings us to the part of this story that is really about marketing, branding, and the thing Rick Ross either does not understand or does not want to admit he understands. Because if we are going to be fair, and we are going to be fair, there is a law of branding at the center of all of this, and it explains both men's careers at once. Here is the law. A famous name does not transfer to every product. It transfers to the products that live inside the story of that name. Think about it like this. If you are a creator with 10 million subscribers on this platform, it is still going to be brutally hard to get 10 million people to follow you somewhere else, because attention does not automatically travel across contexts. The same is true for celebrities and products. If a sports figure endorses athletic shoes, the public accepts it instantly, because shoes live inside the sports story. If that same athlete endorses a meal prep plan, workout gear, recovery equipment, people nod along, because all of it lives inside the same story. But put that athlete in a commercial for luxury sedans, and the audience feels the seams. The story broke. The name was borrowed, not native. Now apply that law to Rick Ross, and you see why some of what he touches works beautifully. Ross built his entire persona around luxury, celebration, the champagne life, the boss aesthetic. So when he attaches his name to champagne, to the Bel-Air life, to the club, that is not marketing. That is autobiography. Champagne pops in the exact moments music plays, celebrations, victories, the good times, and, let us be honest, some of the hard times too. The product and the music live in the same room. His brand and the bottle tell one continuous story, and that is why it moves. Give the man his credit. That was a smart alignment, and it made him real money. Now apply the same law to 50 Cent, and you see why Ross's critique misses. 50 Cent's name is not a niche anymore. It stopped being a niche somewhere around the time a beverage deal reportedly made him one of the wealthiest men in the history of the genre. 50 Cent is not a rapper who endorses things. 50 Cent is a brand that occasionally raps. Television, spirits, apparel, publishing, production deals, and yes, sneakers. His story is not one lifestyle lane. His story is the hustle itself, the come up, the corner office arc that his entire audience watched happen in real time. And a sneaker from 2003 sits dead center in that story, because the G-Unit shoe was never just footwear. It was proof, back then, that a kid from Southside Jamaica, Queens could stand next to the biggest athletes in the world and have his name on a shelf at the biggest sportswear retailers in America. When people copped the G6 this week, they were not buying leather and rubber. They were buying a receipt from an era. That is why nostalgia is the wrong word and why 50 pushed back on it in that interview. He called it impact, and honestly, the 2-hour sellout is a strong argument that he is right. The comparison that makes it click is Nelly and the Air Force One. That shoe worked for Nelly because it already lived inside the culture before the check was cut. The song was a mirror, not an advertisement. Same energy here. The G6 was organic before it was commercial, and that kind of product does not expire. It just waits. And notice the contrast Ross does not want in frame. The difference between this and, say, the Yeezy phenomenon is instructive. Yeezy exploded partly because the market was tired and wanted an alternative, the way one cola rises when the other stumbles. That was disruption energy. The G6 is the opposite play. It is legacy energy, the return of something proven, sold not to the young collectors who flip pairs by Friday, but to the collectors who used to be young, the ones who had the original, wore it into the ground, and have been asking Reebok for years to bring it back. That buyer is not reselling next week. That buyer is putting one pair on ice and wearing the other one to family functions. Different market, different physics, same result, gone in 2 hours. But now we have to talk about the part of this that takes the whole thing from business debate into something a little more personal, because Rick Ross mocking a man's sneaker sellout requires you to forget what happened to Rick Ross's own sneaker deal. And we are not going to forget. Some of y'all remember this, and for the ones who do not, class is in session. Years ago, Rick Ross had his own arrangement with a major sneaker company, and by major, we mean the very same company that just sold out of G6S, Reebok. Ross was one of their flagship hip-hop partners. And then came a guest verse with lyrics so inflammatory that listeners, activists, and women's organizations all arrived at the same conclusion. The words crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. Ross initially defended the lyric. The backlash grew. Petitions circulated. Protesters showed up outside a flagship store. And eventually Reebok made the corporate decision to cut ties with him entirely. Ross apologized, more than once, but the deal was already gone. So let us set the scene clearly. One man lost his sneaker partnership in a public controversy of his own making. The other man's sneaker partnership just sold out in 2 hours, 23 years deep, with the CEO doing press about momentum. And it is the first man, the one whose shoe chapter closed in disgrace, who is on camera telling you the second man's success is fake. You could not write a cleaner illustration of projection if you tried. Ross is not describing 50 Cent's reality. He is describing his own scar tissue. And it gets even more layered, because Ross did not stop at the shoes. He also let everybody know that when people told him the G6S were ugly and nobody they knew bought a pair, they also reminded him that he had been tuned in when 50 made his big appearance during the Versus era. And Ross's response to that was to reveal, or at least claim, that he holds equity in Versus. He thanked Curtis for the free pop-out. He framed the whole thing as 50 Cent showing up and working, in effect, for a platform Ross supposedly owns a piece of. He even joked that next time he would make sure a nicer ride was waiting for him. Now, is that equity claim confirmed anywhere outside of Ross's own mouth? Not that we can verify today. But notice the move, because it is a signature move. When the scoreboard does not favor Ross, Ross relocates the scoreboard. Shoe sold out. Move the conversation to who owns the platform. Platform question shaky? Move it to 10-year-old bankruptcy testimony. It is a shell game, and it only works if the audience keeps their eyes moving at his speed. Slow it down, and every shell is empty. And the timeline, for what it is worth, has already rendered its early verdict. The comments under Ross's clips are not debating bots. They are posting photos of checkout confirmations. They are asking where the Ross-branded sneaker is, knowing full well there has not been one since the split. They are reminding everybody that the man lecturing about genuine numbers once had a corporate partner walk away from him over lyrics he defended before he apologized for them. The crowd can be cruel, but the crowd is rarely wrong about the broad strokes, and the broad strokes here are brutal for Miami. There is also a bigger industry question sitting underneath all of this, and it deserves a minute. Ross touched something real when he talked about bot inflation and fake first weeks, because that problem is genuine and everybody in the business knows it. The tragedy of his delivery is that he aimed a legitimate critique at the one target this month that disproves itself in real time. There are artists right now whose follower counts are hollow villages, whose launches crater by week 2 exactly like Ross described. And if he had named any of them, this week would have played as prophecy. Instead, he aimed at the man with the empty shelf and the CEO press quote, and prophecy became parody. Credibility is a resource, and Ross just spent a chunk of his proving the opposite of his own point. As for what comes next, watch 3 things. First, whether Reebok announces a second G-Unit drop, because that CEO did not tease what is next by accident, and a restock or a new colorway would be the final word on whether the demand is real. Second, whether 50 Cent responds with words at all, or whether he does what he usually does and responds with a product placement, a t-shirt, or a scene in a show that says everything without saying anything. Third, and this is the one to really watch, whether Ross lets this go, because history says the longer he talks about 50 Cent, the worse the math gets for him, and somebody in his circle has to know that by now. Let us slow down on one line Ross delivered, because it reveals more than he intended. He offered a toast to all the real hustlers, implying the sellout was theater, that no reseller was touching the shoe, that nobody in his orbit had bought a pair. Now listen to what that line quietly admits. Ross surveyed his circle and found no buyers, and he treated that as proof of a scam. But his circle is not the market. The G6 buyer is not standing in a Miami lounge. The G6 buyer is a 39-year-old who had the original in high school, who saw the drop alert at work, and who checked out on a phone before the meeting started. The absence of hype in Ross's rooms does not disprove demand in everybody else's. That is the oldest mistake in marketing, mistaking your own bubble for the census. And while we are here, the rented jewelry testimony Ross keeps weaponizing deserves its final burial. In the luxury economy, borrowing high-end pieces is not evidence of poverty. It is standard practice. Jewelers loan millions in stones to celebrities precisely because the photograph is the advertisement, and both parties profit from the arrangement. Half the red carpets you have ever watched ran on borrowed ice. When 50 Cent described that system under oath, he was not confessing to being broke. He was describing how the entire industry moves, and any honest jeweler in the business will tell you the same thing. Now, about that Verzu's equity claim, because it deserves a careful handling. Ownership stakes in that platform became a complicated, litigated subject after the platform itself changed hands, and whether Ross's piece is meaningful, symbolic, or somewhere in between is not something we can settle today. What we can settle is the tactic. Announcing you profit from your rival's appearance is a clever line. It genuinely is, but it concedes the thing Ross never wants to concede. That 50 Cent's presence is the product. You do not brag about owning a slice of the stage and then argue the performer on that stage draws no crowd. Pick one. Either the appearance was valuable, in which case 50's pull is real, or it was worthless, in which case the equity flex is empty. Both cannot be true, and Ross tried to sell you both in the same breath. There is also a lesson here for every legacy artist watching this feud from the sidelines. and it is bigger than either man. The G6 sellout proved that a catalog-era star with a coherent brand story can outsell the noise of the moment without a single new record. No rollout, no single, no dance challenge. Just a 23-year-old design and a name that never lied to its audience. That should terrify every artist whose following is wider than it is deep, and it should encourage every artist who treated their brand like a business instead of a costume. When the history of this era gets written, the takeaway will not be that 50 Cent won an argument. It will be that authenticity compounds, quietly, for decades, and then one Thursday it cashes out in 2 hours. Let us also address the little jabs Ross sprinkled through all of this, because they tell you who he thinks he is talking to. He said the G-Unit sneakers are headed for the discount racks at Costco. He said he actually prefers the Lloyd Banks colorway over all the others, then pivoted to telling 50 he should give Lloyd Banks his own high top now, and slid in a shot about one of 50's other ventures stalling out, suggesting he focus on sneakers instead. On the surface it is playful. Underneath, it is a very old rap tactic. Praise the soldier to needle the general. You compliment Lloyd Banks to imply the empire is fragmented, you mention the stalled venture to suggest decline, and you wrap all of it in a laugh, so it cannot be called what it is. And here is the thing about that tactic with this particular opponent. It has never once worked. You knew the second Ross pressed record that 50 Cent was going to respond, because it is Rick Ross and it is 50 Cent, and that law is older than some of your favorite rappers. These two have been trading fire since the late 2000s, through lyrics, through videos, through courtrooms, through interviews, through entire eras of the genre. There is no version of this story where Ross says stop lying on camera and 50 Cent lets it breathe. Sure enough, 50's posture came through right on schedule, and his argument was not about shoes at all. His argument was about geography and scoreboards. In essence, his position is this. Certain artists came up in the South while New York ran everything, and they have spent their careers measuring themselves against a standard their numbers never met. And then he said the quiet part with his chest. The comparison is not close. He called it a landslide. He said it is not even a conversation. And he closed with the accusation he has leveled for years, that Ross's antics do damage to the culture itself. Cold. Precise. Zero interest in the sneaker debate, because from 50's side of the table, the sneaker debate was already settled by the clock. 2 hours. Sold out. Next question. And that is the moment this stops being about footwear and becomes what it always was. Two theories of empire colliding in public, one more time, with the whole internet as referee. Because look at what each man actually did this week. 50 Cent let a product speak. No rant. No time-stamped receipts. No name-calling. A shoe dropped. The people came. The shelf emptied. The CEO smiled on record, and the headline wrote itself. Rick Ross, meanwhile, spent the same week talking about 50's numbers, 50's courtroom history, 50's ventures, 50's everything. One man was the news. The other man was covering the news. And in attention economics, which is the real economy both of these men live in, that distinction is everything. The person the story is about always eats better than the person narrating it. Now let us be genuinely fair before we land this plane, because this channel does not do one-sided verdicts, and the full picture is more interesting than the memes. Rick Ross is not a failure. Not even close. 20 years in, still relevant, still touring, still moving records within his lane, and still one of the most recognizable voices the genre has ever produced. His instincts on luxury branding are legitimately elite. The champagne alignment, the boss mythology, all of it points to a man who understood his niche earlier and better than most of his peers. And on a personal level, a lot of us are quietly rooting for the man. The relationship he is in right now is a great look. The piece seems real, and when Ross is focused on the music still delivers. That is all true, and it would be dishonest to leave it out. But, and it is a significant but, there is a self-awareness problem creeping into the boss's public calculations, and this week put it under lights. When your argument requires the audience to forget that your own shoe deal ended in a corporate firing, the argument is not strategy, it is amnesia. When your followers do not convert thesis launches the same week the target's followers convert in 120 minutes, the thesis is not analysis. It is timing so bad it circles into comedy. And when your response to another man's win is always a history lesson about his losses, people eventually stop hearing the history and start hearing the envy. That is the chart that is actually declining for Rick Ross right now, and no amount of biggest boss branding papers over a pattern the entire timeline can see. Meanwhile, consider the door 50 Cent has barely opened. The G6 came back with nostalgia doing the heavy lifting, and it still vanished. Now imagine what happens if he actually mobilizes the television audience, the Spirit's customers, the collaborators, the network of artists and executives who owe him favors or want his co-sign, all pointed at one product launch. If a quiet re-release did 2 hours, a coordinated full-court press does numbers that end the debate permanently. Ross keeps warning you the demand is fake. The dangerous possibility, for Ross, is that the demand has not even been fully tapped yet. So where does this go from here? Here is what I believe, and then I want to hear what you believe. This was never Rick Ross exposing a fake sellout. This was Rick Ross doing what Rick Ross has done for nearly 2 decades, attaching his name to 50 Cent's gravity at the exact moment that gravity is strongest, because that is still the fastest way to get the culture to look at him. And it works. It worked today, because here we are talking about him. But it is a sugar high, not a meal. Every cycle of this beef ends the same way. 50's numbers speak, Ross's words respond, the timeline laughs, and the scoreboard does not move. 2 hours sold out against 20 years of talking about it. The machine against the microphone. And until Ross builds a scoreboard of his own that does not require 50 Cent's name on it to get attention, the landslide 50 talked about is only going to get wider. And pay attention to the timing one more time, because the calendar itself is part of the evidence. 23 years. That number is doing more work in this story than any verse either man has written in a decade. 23 years means the kids who bought the original are adults with money now. 23 years means the shoe survived every trend cycle that buried its competitors. 23 years means this was not a drop, it was a reunion, and reunions do not need marketing budgets because the audience brings the emotion with them. Rick Ross is asking you to believe that a reunion nobody attended emptied the building in 2 hours. Sit with how absurd that sounds, because he said it with a straight face and he meant it. One more thing before the verdict, and it is the detail almost every outlet skipped. 50 Cent did not respond to Ross with a single sentence about sneakers. Not one. He went straight to scoreboards, culture, and legacy, because from his side of the table the shoe question was settled the minute the inventory hit zero. That silence is strategy. Men who are lying defend the specific claim. Men who are holding receipts let the receipts sit in plain sight and talk about something else entirely. Watch how he moves over the next 2 weeks, because if history is any guide, the next response will not be an interview. It will be a product, a post, or a scene, and Ross will be the unpaid star of it, same as he has been for nearly 20 years. The sneaker sold out in 2 hours. The response took days. That, right there, is the whole story. The product moved faster than the narrative, and no amount of narration catches a product the people already decided they wanted. 23 years ago, the shoe proved a rapper could be a brand. This week it proved the brand outlived the noise. And the loudest man in the room, the one who calls himself the biggest boss, just spent a week trying to convince you that an empty shelf is an illusion. The shelf does not lie, Ross. The shelf has never lied. But now it is your turn, because this one is going to split the comment section right down the middle. Who's read on this do you actually trust? Rick Ross telling you the demand is manufactured, or a 2-hour sellout with the CEO celebrating on the record? Is Ross's no-bots philosophy the real flex the industry needs? Or is it a convenient sermon from a man whose own sneaker chapter ended in termination? And be honest, if 50 Cent really does give Lloyd Banks that high top, are you copying it or not? Sound off below, because the best takes are going straight into the follow-up video. And if you think this chapter was messy, you have not seen the paperwork trail sitting underneath another hip-hop empire story we are about to open up, the one where the jewelry, the deals, and the numbers all tell 2 different truths at once. That video is on your screen right now. Do not let the algorithm feed you something weaker. I will see you over there, and you already know how we do it.